Reactive training systems.
You guys built a lot of capacity, including more variations and things of that nature. It developed muscles in different ways that allowed you to kind of regain movement capacity that may have been lost over those years. Is that something that you guys are going to continue doing in any capacity? Do you like continue to have an eye toward that?
So I think movement is dynamic throughout an athlete's career. And the biggest thing that can change a movement strategy is an injury, right? That's like a traumatic event that's going to affect how you move moving forward. What I've taken from this, it's many things, but on this topic, we want to make sure that the main lift training that we're doing is reinforcing a pattern that we want to reinforce and not a dysfunctional pattern that's leading to further injury. Because with a high specificity training approach, you're reinforcing a pattern over and over again. And when you do that, you reinforce the skill of doing that pattern, but you can also reinforce the errors that the person does that pattern with. And you could also reinforce and continuously add more inflammation onto areas which can potentially chronically weaken over time. So if someone is following a highly specific training strategy, we want to make sure that, for example, if you're doing low bar squat, where you're loading your hips more, this would be a really good match. Someone who maybe needs to strengthen their hip extensors more because their quads are, overwhelmingly strong. But it's not going to be the way to help a lifter with lagging quads improve their strength because you're not really loading it that much, right? You're just reinforcing this. Let's use your hip and back extension more and more over time. And yeah, I view the movement almost like we have to clear you for specific training now, rather than we're just going to administer it right off the bat.
Yeah. Does that look like additional, like you're being mindful of stuff like that when you're doing technical reviews, or is there some other indicator that you're pulling in?
Technique reviews at different load. I'm watching how your movement changes with fatigue, with increasing load. If we do notice a movement change in your update, and perhaps we went up 5 kilos, is this movement change an act of randomness, which would indicate that we need to deal with something, technique consistency, or is it a compensation due to load? And if it is a compensation to load, it's looking deeper to see what is actually happening, considering the athlete's injury history and trying to understand what's going on beneath the surface, and then train what we need to train in that, rather than just saying like, we're going to low bar squat this person as much as they can, because that strategy can be and is effective, but it lacks precision, and it's also not a sustainable way of training throughout the entire career.
Yeah, I mean, it works until it doesn't. If you kind of think of it, my brother got into racing remote control cars. Maybe not racing, but he was playing around with remote control cars, designing his own and things like that. And to find out that, you would engineer it in specific ways so that, when you crashed, certain parts would break first, and they were the parts that were the easiest to repair, and things like that. And it got me thinking about, like, from an athletic standpoint, you're going to push your body as far as you can, and then something is going to be a limiter, and then you have to then deal with that. And certain people, those limiters don't seem to show up until really far down the road. And then other people have to deal with limiters almost immediately, just because the differences in how we're all built, what we can tolerate, differences in work capacity. Could go on and on about that, but I guess those constraints really seem, at least to me, seem to lead us down the path of like different programming solutions.
Yeah, the goal of training is to apply enough stress to provoke an adaptation. And then within that, it's also not to overdo it on the amount of stress that you apply to the point where you trigger an injury or on a decline in performance that you don't want. Yeah, I think this process of helping Taylor through this complex string of injuries has opened my eyes to individualizing training in the way that you've said. And it's almost brought me closer back to what we were doing in strength and conditioning with, you have team plays 82 games of hockey. Maybe they make playoffs and then they have another extra like 7, 14, 21 games, depending on how far they make it. And afterwards, they would take 3 weeks off completely. No hockey, maybe yoga or like very light training. And then we start with a very easy period of training to build work capacity and mobility and stability. And they wouldn't start skating until 1 month before training camp quite often. It's kind of like now when someone competes, unless they're in like their prime years, quite often an advocate of let's not compete 3 times this year. Let's compete twice and let's take some time to regenerate and to improve some of the general qualities that we haven't been able to address, because the way that I peak someone is still pretty similar to how I've always worked. But let's take some time to focus on a variation of qualities that we worked. And then let's get you ready for that specific training approach that we know works and apply it to be at our best when it matters most. But yeah, just a lot more targeted now.
Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, for what it's worth, like I see that in the stuff that I see coming from you. I see this sort of mindset shift a little bit over the years. But it makes sense to me too that you would kind of have that preparation period in mind, and that you would be looping in more lessons learned from your time in strength and conditioning. At the end of the day, like you're still looking at an athlete and trying to cause a certain set of adaptations. It's not like the adaptations are a little different. They build in a different way, and there's differences to be sure, but still like it's an adaptive process that's shares a lot of similarities.
And it keeps the goal, having a bit of a long-term plan of these are the things we need to do to check off the boxes in order to get to the work that will peak you for high performance.
Really interesting to think about like competing twice a year as a mechanism for doing that. It makes sense. I suppose when I haven't really thought about it much in that term, but when I think about it at this particular moment, that's got to be a tough pill to swallow for some athletes, because some like 3 times a year doesn't feel like that much. But when you look at the peaking process that's required, it chews up a lot of the calendar. So it makes sense to, if you reduce your frequency of competition, you do avail yourself of more resources for that off season. Have you considered like trying to work it in more in the spaces between training phases and things like that, just as more of a means to maintain those abilities? Or is that something that you buy into?
Generally build a new microcycle at the start of a non-competitive period. I might update the microcycle more often in the non-competitive period because we're working on a larger variety of qualities. And it's really not until like 4 to 8 weeks out, where we're really tapering that down by a substantial amount and wrapping up the specific volume and intensity. So I think I end up designing a new microcycle less and less as competition approaches. And I'm just gradually taking things out, or maybe progressing certain exercises that I want to progress. And I think that ends up maintaining what we want to maintain. And then if it does decay in the final 4 to 8 weeks, we can boost the amount of training that we're doing for it again after the competition. So I guess a more gradual and extended approach is my way of applying the pivot concept.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for that. That's a idea that, I heard guys talking about coming up, like taking more extended off seasons. Like Dave Tate talks about, taking a period after training. I think he says something like 8 weeks or something like that, where after a competition, he tries to keep people from putting a bar on their back or in their hands, a straight bar for like 8 weeks, which still feels like a lot to me at this point in my life. But, I do have to say, like, my views on this have definitely changed over the years. I used to be like, well, just competed, I'm back in the gym on Monday, and I would push most people to do the same. But as time has gone on, it's not necessary. And it seems to be like not harmful when you're in this certain period of your life. But then anytime outside of that, it's not good. May as well get in the habit of taking a little time away, I think.
I think as competitive experience accrues through the years, it's wise to take more time to regenerate and more time to prepare. I think that's a logical approach to reduce the amount of issues you have while still competing really effectively.
I was just reminded of the term allostatic load, chronic stress buildup over time. We have a certain allostatic load, and eventually it can go on for quite some time within toleration, but you have to take time off, or an injury will force you to take time off. And if you're going to have to do it anyway, you should probably choose to take it on your own terms.
At a
A
time
lot
when
less, a lot less invasive that way, for sure.
Shh. There is a secret to great training programs, but it's not a magic set and rep scheme or this one weird exercise that powerlifting pros don't want you to know about. The secret is in your training log. See, years ago, we began developing tools to help you unlock these secrets, and we've been putting them online for free ever since. That's right, it's free for everybody. Now you may be thinking, what's the big deal? People have been logging training forever, and you're right, but the secret isn't just in keeping a logbook. It's using that log to make better training decisions. That's the real secret. This is where the RTS training log excels. You haven't done SSB squats in 3 months and you're wondering what your target weight should be? We can help you with that. Did you overshoot on your top set and you're wondering if you should adjust your back off sets? We can help you with that too. Are you building the most important training block of this year and you're wondering what your most highly effective blocks have in common? Yep, we got you covered there too. There's more. There's a lot more. And yes, it is all free. Not just a free trial, not free with ads, just regular free. You go to reactivetrainingsystems.com, then you click on apps, sign up for a login, and you're in.